Hello, class, and welcome to week 10. I'm very excited that we have made it this far in our journey. So we are going to have a little bit shorter of a lecture today. We're just going to talk about counselor and client resistance, which is what we discussed in our group discussion board this week. So I'm very excited to be talking about that. We'll just jump right in. We'll start off with what you do as a counselor if you experience client resistance. So that would be a client resisting maybe the feedback that you're giving them, resisting change, resisting any sort of maybe even participation in therapy, all of those sorts of things. So what do you do if a client resists? Because I will let you know, it's going to happen, and it happens quite often. Even though many of our clients are there of their own volition because they understand that there's something wrong and things need to change, you oftentimes will be met with that resistance. Resistance isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can suggest where we're stuck. It can suggest that maybe there's another issue going on. Resistance isn't necessarily something that we need to be scared of, but more or less we need to be mindful of. So when a client resists you as a counselor or your advice or your feedback or something that you're saying or talking about, the first thing that I would encourage y'all to do is to check your agenda. Is it possible that you're headed in a direction that they're maybe not so comfortable going in? Not that they wouldn't be comfortable down the road, but that for right now, they're maybe not feeling like it's the most important thing to be talking about, or perhaps they're just not ready to go there yet. Which leads me to my second point is that a lot of times when we face resistance from our clients, one of the things that I've been taught or that I've been noticing is that is often a very sure indicator that the client is being pushed too fast, that they're not ready to go to a certain place that you're wanting to take them yet. And so they resist, they push back. Maybe it looks like relapse, maybe it looks like not showing up for sessions, maybe it looks for not doing homework or being argumentative or all of those sorts of things. But oftentimes when a client resists us or resists the change that we are trying to help them with, it's often a sign that we might just be pushing them a little bit too fast and they're not ready to go there yet. So as an example, I wanted to share with you a case study of somebody that I've worked with before. This is a middle-aged man. He's in his mid-40s. He came to me for a variety of reasons, and as we continued to dig a little bit more and more, there was more issues that definitely came to the surface. And when he first started with therapy, he came in saying that he had a narcissistic ex-wife, that he was somebody who had been diagnosed with adult ADHD. He split the parenting with he and his ex-wife, so he would be 1 week on, 1 week off. All three of his kids had ADHD. It was very clear that there was codependency issues, that he had very much a low self-confidence, absolutely no boundaries. He was in a current relationship, and I think he was engaged to be married, and there was some obvious issues there as he was still involving his ex-wife in their life because there was no boundaries and she was kind of pushing through them. So there was kind of this whole conglomeration of very, very obvious and apparent issues. And as a counselor on the outside, I could see this. But sometimes we forget that as a client, as you living in your own life, you aren't always privy to the same perspective that other people might have on you. And so as we started talking, we would have great conversations about what's it like to implement boundaries. Why is that important? How would he do that with kids? How can he translate that to his adult relationships and those sorts of things? And we would walk out. He would walk out of the room with a really good sense of knowledge as far as just different things that he could be doing and things to be reflecting on. And every week he would come back and say the same thing, that his ex-wife had plowed right through him and that he wasn't able to implement boundaries, and that he really felt like that was a reflection of his character and all of these sorts of things. And really we were kind of in this standstill mode for several weeks as we just talked and talked and talked and talked, and sometimes those are the sessions that I start to not look forward to because I feel like there's not a lot of progress going on here. But what happened is through all of the psycho ed that we did, We talked about boundaries. We talked about cycles of conflicts. We talked about relational cycles. We did EFT, emotions focused therapy. We talked about boundaries with children and disciplining and parenting and all of those sorts of things, very much on a head level, that psychoeducation level. And a lot of times I felt like I was talking in circles, like we would have the same conversation over and over and over, and he would ask that question, how do I change? How do I change? What do I need to do to change? And we'd always come back to this point of going, are you ready to change? And that's where I would leave him, because it was very clear he wasn't ready to change. And so I started to notice that my frustration was because I was trying to push him to a place that he was not yet ready to go. And I knew and was able to affirm with him that when he was ready to go there, it would be very obvious. So one day, we had a breakthrough. It was awesome. Actually, his fiance came in because I am very systemic, and so I had her in and just kind of sharing her thoughts. And she made the comment that a couple weeks earlier, his ex-wife had called like she normally did, asked him to take the kids like she always does. That was outside of the parenting plan, and it was very classic boundary kind of plowing through behavior. And for the first time ever, my client said, no, I'm sorry, I can't take them. We already have plans for the day. Now, he didn't realize that his fiance was listening and witnessing to this whole conversation. But his fiance was absolutely elated because this one simple no was a clear recognition that he was actually making changes. And so when he came into the next session, he was very proud of himself because he recognized that this was a step that he was now willing to take. It moved from just the head down, kind of down into the heart, where he was actually able to act on that because he knew that that was something important for him and for his children and for his current relationship. So sometimes that client resistance, we can face it because the client just really isn't ready to go there. And so it's our job to patiently walk with them. There's nothing wrong with psychoeducation. There's nothing wrong with asking questions like, what would be scary to do this, or to implement boundaries, or to talk to this person, and just get that person processing through why it is that they're struggling so much with moving forward. That's not being unsuccessful in counseling. In fact, that's being very successful in counseling because you're meeting your client exactly where they're at. Another reason that a client might resist the counseling process or feedback is they might not feel like there is enough of a therapeutic relationship, that they don't feel like they would be judged by something that they've said. Now, of course, it's our job to provide that open environment, but a lot of times clients have things that they're carrying with them and shame that's been bagged up for years and years and years, and they're wanting to share it. They're just not sure if they feel safe to share it. Again, it has nothing really to do with you. It's just that they are carrying something and they have to be certain that they're ready to share it. And they have to have some amount of knowing and relationship to understand that when they do share it, it's not going to be met with a spirit of judgment or a discompassionate response. If a client resists you, what's so important to recognize is that that's not necessarily an opportunity to go on a soapbox and to do a little preaching. There's a difference between psychoed and preaching. Psychoed is where you're going to educate the client on what's going on, or perhaps it's boundaries, or EFT, or narcissism, or those sorts of things. Psychoed invites those questions of going, tell me why it's so difficult to actually move on some of these things. We've talked about this for a long time, but you seem to be stuck in this place. Tell me about that. That's a psychoed approach. A soapbox approach is when it's very much what it sounds like in that preaching, and this is what needs to happen, and you need to be willing to do this kind of fire and brimstone in the therapeutic setting. When a client resists, moving onto a soapbox is definitely not somewhere where we want to go, because that automatically puts them on the defensive and it pins us against them. That's not where we want to go. But I will say this, if resistance becomes sort of a pattern, it is okay to call your client out on that. That's very helpful for the therapeutic process. I have a friend of mine who I do staffing of cases with, and there's one client in particular who actually is in a graduate psychology program, who's coming to her for therapy. And my friend has noticed that every week this client is very, very resistant to any feedback, to any movement, anything. And this is somebody who's very well educated in terms of what is resistance, the counseling process, all of those sorts of things. And so what my friend did one day, she just kind of called that out. She said, I'm noticing that every time we talk about this, which is what you're bringing into the session, there's a lot of resistance in any conversation or any new ideas or thinking outside your box and growing. And that was an opportunity for her to just kind of invite her client into that moment and to explore the resistance. If she's resisting, then stop there and explore what that is, what that resistance is. Again, resistance isn't necessarily something we need to take defense to, but rather we lean into that process. We invite the resistance and we become curious about that. But the thing that is very important to remember is that most of the time when clients are resisting us, it's actually not about us. It's maybe that they're resisting the feedback that we're giving them or the solutions that we suggest, but they're not necessarily resisting us. And of course, that can feel very, very personal, like nothing I say matters or I'm not making any sort of an impact. But again, remember, this process is about the client's growth and their timing that they need in order to work through whatever it is that they're going through. And so when they resist, again, it's not about you. They're not resisting you necessarily, because they keep coming back. If they were resistant to you, they wouldn't come back. Okay? And even if they don't come back, that's not necessarily a reflection of you as a counselor. It maybe just wasn't a good fit, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But recognize that when a client resists, it's not about you personally, but potentially where the client's at, and that they're resisting the feedback that you're giving them rather than you yourself.